Did the story of the seven sleepers in the Golden Legends Lives of the Saints inspire Washington Irving to write a short story about another deep sleeper, Rip Van Winkle? Why did Edward Gibbon mention the legend of the seven sleepers in his Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire? Were there other stories of men who slept for decades or centuries? What moral and spiritual lessons can be learned from the legends of the seven sleepers and Rip Van Winkle? Please, we welcome interesting questions in the comments. Let us learn and reflect together. At the end of our talk, we'll discuss the sources used for this video. Please feel free to follow along in the PowerPoint script we uploaded to SlideShare, which includes illustrations. Our sister blog includes footnotes, and both include our Amazon book links. We read in the Golden Legend, when the Emperor Decius came to Ephesus to persecute the Christians, he built temples there so all the Ephesians could join him in worshiping the idols. When he ordered that all Christians should be hunted down, put in chains, and forced either to sacrifice or be put to death, everyone was terrified. Friend betrayed friend, fathers disowned their sons, and sons their fathers. There were 7 Christians in that city: Maximianus, Malchus, Marcianus, Dionysius, Johannes, Serapion, and Constantinus, who were deeply distressed by what they had witnessed. Though they were among the important palace officials, they utterly refused to sacrifice to the idols, hiding in their homes, fasting and praying. They were accused and brought before Decius. There was no doubt that they were Christians, but the emperor gave them time to come to their senses. They then gave all they owned to the poor and went into hiding on a cave on Mount Celion. There they stayed for some time, and each day one of them would dress up in rags and, pretending to be a beggar, go off to the city to obtain food. When Malchus went into town, he learned that the emperor had summoned them to perform sacrifices. When he told the others, they were all terrified. As they sat down to eat, weeping and sighing as they spoke together, suddenly God willed them to fall asleep. The emperor was enraged when he learned that these 7 Christians were hiding in Mount Celion. Decius was prompted by God to block up the mouth of the cave with stones so they would starve to death. These orders were carried out, and 2 Christians wrote an account of their martyrdom and hid it carefully among the stones. But these 7 sleepers were not martyred. They were put into a deep sleep. They slept deeply for 372 years, when Decius and all his generation were long dead, until the 30th year of the Christian emperor Theodosius. That is the wrong number of intervening years, and what does it mean? Perhaps it is the 365 days of the year plus the 7 sleepers, spanning more than the 4 seasons. That's my speculation. Was this the inspiration for the later American short story by Washington Irving, Rip Van Winkle, who slept for decades, only to awaken long after the American Revolution? Now, why was the crusty atheist Edward Gibbon, author of the History of the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, so interested in the lives of these ancient saints? Gibbon recounts that when they awoke, one of the 7 sleepers went into town to purchase bread. I guess they're begging no more. The youth could no longer recognize the once familiar countryside. To his surprise, there was a large cross triumphantly erected over the principal gate of Ephesus. His singular dress and obsolete language confounded the baker, to whom he offered the ancient medal of Decius as a current coin of the empire. As this raised suspicion of a hidden treasure, he was dragged before the judge. The townspeople were amazed that these young men escaped the rage of a pagan tyrant. The bishop of Ephesus, the clergy, the magistrates, the people, and the emperor Theodosius himself hastened to visit the cavern of the 7 sleepers. And Gibbon wonders what it would be like for eons to pass quickly by while one is asleep, especially for the 2 centuries between the reigns of the pagan Decius and the Christian emperor Theodosius the Younger. During this period, the seat of the government has been transported from Rome to a new city, Constantinople, on the banks of the Thracian Bosporus, with the loss of the pagan military spirit. The throne of the persecuting Decius was filled by a succession of Christian and Orthodox princes, who had extirpated the fabulous gods of antiquity. Instead, the public devotion of this new age exalted the saints and martyrs of the Catholic Church on the altars of Diana and Hercules. The union of the Roman Empire was dissolved. Its genius was humbled in the dust, and armies of unknown barbarians, issuing from the frozen regions of the north, had established their victorious reign over the fairest provinces of Europe and Africa. Now, in the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, Edward Gibbons reflects on the legends of the 7 sleepers before he tells how the unarmed Pope Leo the Great bravely marched into the camp of Attila the Hun, persuading him to spare Rome from the usual sacking and plundering, and Rome likely paid a generous tribute. We also reflected on this turn of history in the beginning of the evolution of the Mediterranean-focused Roman Empire to the numerous Christian regimes from France to Germany that arose from the splintered barbarian kingdoms. And we'll hear the rest of the story from the Golden Legend. Now the Lord was prompted to awake our 7 youthful saints when there was a widespread heresy denying the resurrection of the dead during the reign of Emperor Theodosius. How was a cave opened? The Golden Legend continues. A certain citizen of Ephesus built shelters for his shepherds on Mount Celion. When the masons were opening up the cave, the saints awoke and greeted each other, thinking that they had been asleep for just one night. Evidently, unlike Rip Van Winkle, none of their beards grew long during that centuries-long night. It was Malchus's turn to go into town to buy bread when he was dumbfounded. He asked himself, how can it be that yesterday nobody dared speak the name of Christ, and today everyone seems to be a Christian? I do believe that this is not Ephesus at all. He searched the crowds for someone he knew, a sibling, a friend, an acquaintance, but they were strangers all. The Golden Legend continues. After giving the matter deep thought, the bishop said to the proconsul, there is some miracle which God wishes to reveal to us through this young man. After reaching the cave on Mount Celion, they found and read the martyr's account written so many centuries before. After reading the story, they noticed the saints sitting in the cave, their faces as pink as roses in bloom. The people fell to the ground glorifying God, and the bishop and proconsul immediately sent word to the Emperor Theodosius, asking him to come quickly and see what the miracle God had just worked. Theodosius immediately departed from Constantinople to Ephesus, glorifying God. Upon arriving, he climbed up to the cave. As soon as the saints saw the emperor, their faces shone like the sun, and the emperor went in and fell on his face before them, then rose, embraced them, and wept for each one of them in turn. Seeing you now, the emperor said, I feel as if I were seeing the Lord raise Lazarus from the dead. St. Maximianus said to him, believe us, it is for your sake that the Lord has raised us to life before the day of the general resurrection, so that you should have absolute faith that there is a resurrection of the dead. For we have really been raised from the dead. We are alive, just as a baby lives in his mother's womb and comes to no harm. So we have lain here and slept and lived on without feeling a thing. And then as everyone watched, they laid their heads on the ground, fell asleep, and obedient to the will of God, gave up the ghost. Belief in the physical resurrection of the dead is a key belief of the ancient church. At the end of the story, our medieval editor corrects the duration, stating that our 7 saints slept for only 196 years. So let's compare the stories of the 7 sleepers to that of Rip Van Winkle. Was Rip Van Winkle in Washington Irving's short story a saint or simply a good man? The tales of the Golden Legend were written a millennium after the lives of the saints it memorializes, and it preceded the founding of the American Republic by another half-millennium. Irving's fictional narrator, Dietrich Knickerbocker, observed that Rip Van Winkle was a simple, good-natured man, a kind neighbor, and an obedient, henpecked husband. Like Jesus, he was fond of children. The children of the village shouted with joy whenever he approached. He assisted at their sports, made their playthings, taught them to fly kites and shoot marbles, and told them long stories of ghosts, witches, and Indians. But the great error in Rip's composition was an insuperable aversion to all kinds of profitable labor. His children, too, were as ragged and wild as if they belonged to nobody. His son Rip, an urchin begotten in his own likeness, promised to inherit the habits with the old clothes of his father. And Rip's sole domestic adherent was his dog Wolf, who was as much henpecked as his master, for Dame Van Winkle regarded them as companions in idleness. And times grew worse and worse with Rip Van Winkle as years of matrimony rolled on. A tart temper never mellows with age, and a sharp tongue is the only edged tool that grows keener with constant use. For a long while he used to console himself when driven from home by frequenting a kind of perpetual club of the sages, philosophers, and other idle personages of the village, which held its session on a bench before a small inn, designated by a rubicund portrait of His Majesty King George III. And doesn't Washington Irving compose brilliant prose? When traipsing through the Catskills squirrel hunting, he came upon a short, stout man who called for him to assist with the carrying of a keg. They came to a company of odd-looking personages playing at ninepins. What seemed particularly odd to Rip was that though these folks were evidently amusing themselves, yet they maintained the gravest faces, the most mysterious silence, and were, withal, the most melancholy party of pleasure he had ever witnessed. and Rip found that the ale was delicious. One taste provoked another, and he reiterated his visits to the flagon so often that at length his senses were overpowered. His eyes swam in his head, and his head gradually declined, and he fell into a deep sleep. But unlike the 7 sleepers, he did not wake unchanged after snoozing for only 20 years. He visibly aged during his long snooze. And he started concocting in his head the excuses that might quiet his nagging wife. Irving's narrator continues. He looked around for his gun, but in place of the clean-cut, well-oiled fowling piece, he found an old firelock lying by him, the barrel encrusted with rust, the lock falling off, and the stock worm-eaten. His dog Wolf was nowhere to be found. As he arose to walk, he found himself stiff in the joints and wanting in his usual activity. He was astonished when he saw that the gully he previously ascended now had a mountain stream foaming down it, leaping from rock to rock. In the 2 decades he snoozed, Rip Van Winkle had missed the world-changing events of the American Revolution, and the village had changed. A troop of strange children ran at his heels, hooting after him and pointing at his gray beard. The very village was altered. It was larger and more populous. There were rows of houses he had never seen before. His own former house had gone into decay, with its roof caved in, doors off their hinges, windows shattered. He was henpecked no longer. His wife had passed away. But his son now looked as he did when he last went squirrel hunting. His daughter remembered him, and he met his granddaughter. How did this sleepy town change during his 20-year snooze? Rip's old inn was gone, but near where it once stood was a hotel with a flagpole fluttering a flag of singular assemblage of stars and stripes, which was strange and incomprehensible. But in place of the ruby face of King George, under which he had smoked so many a peaceful pipe, was a figure for which the red coat was changed for one of blue and bluff. A sword was held in the hand instead of a scepter, and the head was decorated with a cocked hat, and underneath was printed in large characters, George Washington. The moral of the story differs from the 7 sleeper saints of the Golden Legend. Irving's narrator closes with what is the common wish of all henpecked husbands in the neighborhood, that they might have a quieting draught out of Rip Van Winkle's flagon. The Mystagogy Orthodox website also has an interesting page on the 7 sleepers and the history it describes. Now we'll discuss the sources we used for this video. The earliest manuscripts of the 7 sleepers date from between the 5th and 6th centuries. The earliest is found in the writings of a Syriac bishop, which was derived from an earlier lost Greek manuscript. Gregory of Tours also has an account of this legend. Including the version in the Golden Legend, in subsequent centuries there were over 200 manuscripts in 9 medieval languages of the 7 sleepers legend. Washington Irving was inspired after reminiscing with his brother-in-law. He locked himself in his room all night, writing the tale of Rip Van Winkle. Dr. Wikipedia speculates that the most likely inspiration was Johann Karl Christoph Nachtigall's German folktale, Peter Klaus, set in a German village, in which a goat herd likewise drinks wine from strangers in the wood, waking 20 years later. And the Quran also has a version of this legend. Washington Irving is a master word crafter. In future reflections, we may read from his essays on Indians, Christmas, rural churches, and of course for Halloween, his other masterpiece on the Headless Horseman and the legend of Sleepy Hollow. Listen how he describes the evening mists of the Catskills that set the mood for Rip Van Winkle's misadventures. And he writes, "When the weather is fair and settled, the Catskills are clothed in blue and purple and print their bold outlines on the clear evening sky. But sometimes when the rest of the landscape is cloudless, they will gather a hood of gray vapors about their summits, which, in the last rays of the setting sun, will glow and light up like a crown of glory." A similar story is told by Diogenes of Laertius about Epimenides, who fell asleep in a cave for 57 years while looking for his father's sheep. According to Diogenes, various sources differ in how long he lived. One source says 154 years, another 157 years, and yet another 299 years. He was a seer, and Diogenes reports that he halted a pestilence, which is usually accomplished by sacrificing to the gods. We learn again that just because 2 stories told centuries apart may have similar plot points does not necessarily mean that one inspired the other. For example, in the ancient ribald Italian novel The Golden Ass, the protagonist is a man who turns into a donkey when his magic spell backfires. But this story is very different from the original Pinocchio story, just as different as the legend of the 7 sleepers is different from the Rip Van Winkle short story. Whereas The Golden Ass is an entertaining ribald story, the Pinocchio story is a moral story of sin, confession, and redemption. And we have book reviews of The Golden Legend and other lives of the saints. The YouTube description includes a link to our PowerPoint script that we uploaded to SlideShare and also our blog. Please support this channel by sharing this video with your friends and by clicking on the like and subscribe buttons and by clicking on the Amazon links to purchase any of the books we discussed, which will earn us a very small affiliate commission. And please consider becoming a patron of our channel. Plus, we will host special discussion groups for our patrons. Plus, you can click on the Meetup or small M icon to participate in our online discussions, where we practice our future YouTube scripts. And please click on the links for other videos that will broaden your knowledge and improve your soul.